Thank you. Thank you for that introduction, Nina. Of course, it's my pleasure to be here with you this afternoon to share with you something that's a very important topic to me, and that is leading positive employee experiences. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means and share with you the work that we're doing at Rotary International. As Nina mentioned, I have the good fortune of being able to serve as the head of global people and talent for Rotary International. Just out of curiosity, any Rotarians in the room? Thank you for your good service. Fortunately for us, our 2020-2021 international president will come from New Delhi, Rotarian Sushil Gupta. So we'll be happy to have him join us for a couple of years in Chicago to lead the organization. So the topic of my discussion today is leading positive employee experiences. And in keeping with the theme of the conference, the role of human emotions in the future of work, I wanted to acknowledge the importance of human emotions and to the extent that they'll continue to impact the workplace, even with technology continuing to disrupt our work and with the introduction of artificial intelligence increasing and expanding even among numerous industries. In fact, some research is suggesting that by 2030, about 30% of the workforce will be replaced by artificial intelligence. Other experts think that it won't have an impact on the workforce because we'll just need to reskill and train up our employees to be able to handle coping with artificial intelligence and how it will impact the workplace. I thought I would start with a quote from Dr. Maya Angelou, famous American poet. She said that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And so that's the theme really of the discussion today around emotions. How you make people feel. I would ask you to think about the best boss you've ever had in your career. Take a moment. What was it about that person that made them your best boss? How did they make you feel? Shout it out. How did they make you feel? Empowered. Valued. Happy. Supported. Comfortable. Emotions are the way that we experience the world. They shape and inform how we approach the world. And the corollary to that is that our employees' emotions shape their experience in the workplace. And as HR professionals, we have a good opportunity to do some great work around focusing on emotions in the workplace with our employees. So how you make people feel. I think of this as an emotional experience. Out of curiosity, how many of you spend time, energy, and resources in either employee engagement surveys or employee opinion surveys? Quite a few of us. We introduced an employee opinion survey back in 2014, repeated it in 2015, repeated it again in 2017, and we were planning to introduce yet another opinion survey this year in 2019. But we thought that maybe we were doing it wrong. And don't get me wrong, our scores were great. In fact, our employee engagement scores were in the excess of 90% for all three iterations. So we were very pleased with our engagement scores. But what did it mean? What did it tell us? We'll talk a little bit about engagement, but I want to focus on the employee experience and the role that the employee experience plays in employee engagement. So what I would suggest is the emotional employee experience is what leads to employee engagement. So the surveys that we were conducting were helping us to measure the impact of employee engagement, but it really wasn't helping us enough, from my perspective, to understand where we needed to focus to improve the employee experience. So I'm going to share with you in this presentation some of the stuff that we're doing to that end. So what is employee experience? It seems a little nebulous. It can be quite a lot of things, but we've narrowed it down to a few things that are important to us as we talk about the employee experience. One of them is the environment in our facilities. Are we providing our employees a safe place to work? Are we providing them with a comfortable place to work? Do they have enough space to get their work done? Are they in close enough proximity to people that they need to work with to get their jobs done? Communication. Are we doing enough to make sure people are informed? Are we providing them with the information they need to be able to do the work that we need them to do? Are they informed of what our strategies are and our goals are? And do they understand how their work connects to those things? Do they understand how they can contribute in a meaningful way to that? And are we doing enough to communicate? And not just share with them, but are we doing enough to communicate from the bottom up? Are they providing us the information that we need to continue to be successful? Of course, a very important one is culture and management. Culture, of course, we know, eats strategy for breakfast. So culture is critically important as it relates to the employee experience. And by culture, I'm talking about what is it like to work here? How do things get done around here? What are the dynamics between employees and managers? And management, I'm talking largely about the relationships between a superior and a subordinate. What is that experience like? And also resources, tools, and equipment. Are we providing people with the stuff that they need to be able to do their work? And so holistically, collectively, we see these things as largely shaping the employee experience. And we believe that if we do these things well, that will result in a favorable employee experience overall, which will then lead to high employee engagement. So what does employee engagement entail? A couple of things that are important to us in terms of employee engagement are our employees' intent to stay. Of course, we want to have low turnover because to the extent that people leave, we have to train new people to do that work. We have to build new relationships all over again. It's costly and time-consuming. So we prefer to build an environment where people want to stay. In fact, last year, for those of you who were here, you may remember that I talked about the tipping point. When does an employee reach the point where it becomes more difficult for them to stay than it is for them to leave? Think about that. That's a question that I would ask with any relationship. What has to happen? In other words, what does your emotional experience need to be in order for you to reach that tipping point where it feels more difficult for you to leave than it is for you to stay? So intent to stay is critically important. Commitment to perform. Here we're not talking about showing up and doing all of the bullet points that exist on your job description, but we're really talking about discretionary effort. Does the job live in your heart? Are you willing to do anything it takes to get the work done, whether it's a bullet point or not? Just this past week, I was visiting our staff in our Delhi office, and I came to learn of a concept that they have there called short leave, where they were asking employees to request time away from work for a portion of a day. So for example, if on Monday my regular start time is 9 o'clock and I have something that is going to distract me in the morning and I need to come in at 10 o'clock, I would go into the computer system and I would request what's called short leave for that 1 hour. And my manager then would have to approve it, and I would have to commit to making up that hour later. And so for me, this was a foreign concept. We don't do this with our employees stateside. We trust them. We trust that they're going to put in the time required to do the work. So I explored this concept a little bit with our HR folks in the Delhi office and wanted to understand, why is that important? Why is that part of the culture? And when I visit our different offices around the world, instead of coming in as an HR expert, because I'm not, by the way, when it comes to employment law around the world, it's impossible to know every single law that there is in every single country that you have employees. So I'm not there as an HR expert. That's why they're there. That's why we have HR managers embedded in our offices. But I show up more as an anthropologist or a sociologist. I show up to try to learn, what is the culture like here? How do things get done? How do people interact? Who's got the power? And not just whose name is in the top box on the org chart, but who's in charge around here? Who do people fear? Who do people know they need to work with to get things done? So I explored this concept of short leave, and the question that I asked that I think was quite profound for our HR team in the Delhi office was, so let me get this straight. When someone can't work, we ask them to go in and log it. We keep a record of it. But what about the times they're giving us their free time? What about the times they're laying in bed thinking about work? What about the times they're driving home thinking about how to respond to that email or thinking about what they want to talk about in that meeting tomorrow? Do we ask them to log that? So my pivotal question was, are we building a culture of trust among our employees in the office? We're sending a message that maybe we don't intend to send, that we don't trust that you're going to get your 40 hours in if you don't prove it in the computer system. So, fortunately, the conversation went really well, and we're making some changes to the way we do work in our Delhi office. To that end, we're hoping to increase our employees' pride in the company. Now, for those of you who are familiar with Rotary, you probably realize that we have the good fortune of being a mission-driven organization with a reputable brand around the world. People can go to bed at night knowing that whatever they've done at work in some way has contributed to making the world a better place. Whether you work in accounts payable, or whether you work in our grants department, or whether you work in membership. And this pride in company isn't just when the workday starts to when the workday ends. It's something that we want people to take with them for the rest of their lives. So we recognize that people will move on. We have a limited number of management positions that people can aspire to. And so to the extent that they can't get promoted within our organization, they need to find those opportunities somewhere else. But when they do, we want them to remember us fondly. We want them to be an advocate of Rotary, not just as a humanitarian service club organization, but as an employer. We want them to refer people to us. This concept of net promoter score. How likely are you to encourage your family or friends to go work for a place like Rotary? So all of those things that shape employee experience, we believe, lead to greater employee engagement. And as I mentioned earlier, we were focused primarily on employee engagement to the exclusion of the employee experience. And we decided this year that we were going to do it the opposite way. We'll come back to employee engagement eventually, but for now, we want to focus on employee experience. This is the collection of all the things that I talked about, the communication, culture management, environment, resources, facilities, all of those sorts of things. So we adopted a new vision statement as part of our global people and talent function. And that is leading the way to an extraordinary employee experience. Leading the way simply because we recognize that as HR professionals, we don't have the ability to shape the culture in the organization completely and entirely without the work and effort of every single supervisor and manager. So our role is to lead the way. In other words, we see our responsibility as being such that we work with every single person who's charged with caring and looking after our employees, because we know that we need them to create that environment. We know that we need them to shape those employee experiences. I asked you to think of a boss that was your favorite in your career, and how did that person make you feel? Anytime I ask that question, I've never had a single person say, I don't remember. Maybe I don't remember the things they said, maybe I don't even remember the things they did, but I certainly remember the way they made me feel. And so what we want to do is work with our supervisors and managers to focus on how they're making employees feel. To do this, we adopted a new people strategy. We decided that our employment life cycle would have 4 main components to it. The first one we call choose. This is entry to the organization. This is where we're trying to express our employer brand. We want to be a desirable place to work. We want people to seek us out. In fact, for many open positions, right now in our world headquarters we have about 40. We get upwards to 1,000 resumes for each opening, which is a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because we have a great opportunity to choose the best person for the role. It's a curse because reading through 1,000 resumes for every opening is difficult at best. But this is not just choose from the perspective of the employer. This is also from the candidate's perspective. To what extent are they choosing us? So we don't look at interviews as an opportunity for us to decide whether or not that person will be a good fit here. We use the interview as an opportunity for that candidate to decide whether or not we're the right place for them to work, whether or not we're going to provide them with the right experiences. Once we decide to make that match, we then move into challenge. This is primarily about job design. Are we creating jobs that are meaningful to people? Are we giving them meaningful work? It's been said that if you want people to do a good job, give them a good job to do. So we're encouraging managers through job design workshops to create positions that do provide opportunities for meaningful work so that they're creating meaningful employee experiences, so that those experiences provide them with feelings that they will take with them and they will remember. Our next component is called Cultivate. You may call this training and development or learning and development, but Cultivate is, for us, what we're doing to make sure that we're continuing to allow our employees to grow professionally and personally, both for their current jobs that they hold today and for future jobs that they may aspire to or that we may need them to occupy moving forward. And the last is care. Keep in mind these are not chronological and they're not discrete. In other words, it's not that as an employee I live in one of the four in any given moment. I may live in all four of them at the same time. Care is something that is critically important to us, especially as global people in talent. We want to make sure that we're caring for our employees both while they're at work and while they're away from work. So do we provide the benefits that our employees need to be taken care of or looked after when they leave, when they punch out, when they're no longer sitting at their desk and actually doing their job? Are we providing the medical benefits to give them peace of mind so that they don't have to worry about something catastrophic happening to them or to their families? Are we providing them with financial resources to save for retirement, to buy a house, to send their children to college, those sorts of things? We recognize that those are major distractors for employees who show up with that baggage day in and day out. If they're constantly worried about how they're going to take care of their elder parents, or how they're going to pay for college, or how they're going to afford their mortgage payment, that will distract them from doing their best job at work. So are we providing them with the tools and resources so that they have some peace of mind and they can take care of those things? And it doesn't end at care. Of course, it comes back to choose, because we recognize that we don't just choose you the moment we sign the offer letter, and you don't just choose us as an employer when you submit it. You choose to work with us every single day. So this starts over constantly. Once we came up with our people strategy, we spent some time defining personas that make up individuals within each of those components. So for example, in choose, we recognize that one persona we would call applicant. One persona we would call a candidate. The difference primarily is an applicant is someone who is considering a position and applying for it. A candidate is someone who has already applied, does meet the qualifications for the job, and is someone that we're considering for the position, likely someone who will be interviewed. A new hire and an interviewer. And these are not an exhaustive list by any means, but just some examples of the different personas that exist in each of the different components of our people strategy. For challenge, we defined several personas as well. What does it look like to be a performer? What does that experience feel like? What is it like to be an underperformer? In other words, how do we treat people who are not able to perform up to the expectations of the job? Does it feel like punishment, or does it feel like a development opportunity? What does it feel like to be a manager? What is that experience like? What does it feel like to be an employee, an individual contributor? In Cultivate, what does it feel like to be a learner when I'm sitting in a class? What is that experience like? What does it feel like to be a hypo, high potential? What does it feel like to be a mentor? What does it feel like to be a mentee? And then in Care, and the example that I'll use to sort of further the discussion around the employee experience at Rotary is an expectant mother. What is that experience like? If I'm a female employee who's preparing to give birth to a child, what does that feel like as an employee of Rotary? What does it feel like to be a patient when I'm unable to participate in work because I need some medical attention? What does it feel like to be a parent? And what does it feel like to be a retiree? So we broke each of these 4 components of our people strategy into these personas so that we could start to really hone in on what experience do we want these folks to feel at work. We defined this as moments that matter. So within Care, if I'm a pregnant woman, that's a moment that matters. And what does that experience feel like? So a couple of examples on the screen. What are people going to say when I tell them? What will their reaction be? Is my manager going to be upset because now I'm going to be away from work and won't be focusing on the tasks at hand? Are my colleagues going to be frustrated because that means they're going to have to pick up my slack? What is that reaction going to look like? What does it feel like to apply for maternity leave? What is that process like? How much paperwork is there? Who do I have to ask for permission? Whose approval do I have to get? How long is it going to take? What sort of health and safety will be available to me in the workplace? In other words, at Rotary, we're not in manufacturing, so we don't have to worry about safety issues so much, but do we have the right facilities? And primarily when the mother's returning to work from maternity leave. We have at Rotary what's called a mother's room for lactation purposes and other things that mothers returning to work need to be focused on. Accommodations. What sort of accommodations are we providing to employees who are experiencing a pregnancy? What is it like to be out on leave? Do I go away for several months and never hear from anyone and feel completely disconnected, don't know what's going on, and come back to find out that my entire department has been reorganized, and by the way, I'm reporting to a different person, and my job has changed? And what is it like reintegrating? What is it like coming back to work? What is that experience like? So we define all of these as examples of moments that matter. And so then as a team, we're working together to define what we can do as an employer to create the experience that we want our employees to have. And we're doing this sort of twofold. Bear in mind that in the Global People and Talent team, we're employees first and HR professionals second. So we understand what kind of experience we want to have as employees, and we want to make sure that we're sharing that experience with other people. But we also want to hear the voice of our employees. We want to hear from them. What do you want this experience to feel like? So we're doing a lot of market research with them. So, just to recap some of the work that we've done. To define the desired experience, the moment that matter that I'm using as an example is returning to work. So coming back to work after having been out on maternity leave. I talked a little bit about the concept of voice of the employee. So after we do all of this work, we've defined the personas, we've determined what we want the experience to be like, we've come up with strategies for how we can execute on that experience. Now we need to talk to our employees to find out, are we meeting their expectations? Are we creating the emotional experiences at work that we intended to create? Are they having the feelings we want them to feel? Because remember, I said that emotions are instrumental in shaping the way we see the world. And the corollary of that is the emotions that our employees feel at work shape their experience at work. So we will continue to do the employee engagement survey. We will continue to measure on an annual basis their opinions about things. But that's not enough. So we'll do that, but we've added 3 additional components. One of them is direct feedback. We're creating a culture where we don't believe in anonymous feedback. We don't want employees to write anonymous notes on a piece of paper and stick it in some locked box somewhere, and eventually we'll read it and maybe do something about it. We're creating a culture where people will come to us directly and talk to us about what's important to them. We're working with managers to understand how to have those conversations with employees. Indirect feedback. So this is a little bit different in that we're using other mechanisms to sort of deduce how our employees are feeling about things. So this could be, for example, the number of complaints we receive when our employees are working with a benefits vendor. This could be a turnover as a metric, as an indicator of indirect feedback. If we see a slight increase in turnover, that prompts us to ask ourselves, what's happening here? Why are people leaving? So direct feedback by way of an exit interview, indirect feedback by way of the aggregated turnover data. And then what we call inferred feedback. These are really understanding the relationships between managers and figuring out what we can make sense of in terms of how employees are feeling regarding the relationships that they have with their managers. So the process. If you're interested in doing what we've done at Rotary, and shifting from employee engagement to the employee experience, and understanding the importance of emotions in the workplace, I would encourage you to first determine and prioritize your personas. We came up with a list of about 47 different personas. It would be impossible for us to try to tackle all 47 at once. So what we had to do is prioritize. What are the personas that are the most important, most critical, most impactful? And let's focus on those personas. Within each of those personas, so for example, one persona was an expectant mother. What are the moments that matter for that persona? For the expectant mother, the examples I gave you as moments that matter include telling people that I'm pregnant, requesting leave, coming back from leave. Those are moments that matter. So for each moment that matters that we define or identify for that persona, we're then defining the desired experience. What do we want that to feel like? What does that look like? And we're writing a narrative about it. And sometimes we're even assigning a name to the persona. This persona's name is Susie. Susie Q employee. She's about 30 years old. She's having her first child. She needs to work. So she's not likely to be away from work very long. So the time she is away from work, we need to make sure is meaningful in bonding with her newborn child. We need to make sure that she's not burdened or distracted with things at work that could take her attention away from caring for her new child. Then we devise strategies to drive those experiences. How do we make that happen? If that's the desired experience that we want our employees to have, what do we have to do to make that happen? And then lastly, we evaluate by using the voice of the employee. As I talked about, the annual opinion survey, direct feedback, indirect feedback, and inferred feedback. So that, in a nutshell, is the work that we're doing around human emotions in the workplace and understanding how the employee experience is critical to employee engagement. So with that, I thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions that I might. I'll be around a little bit after the session, and you're welcome to connect with me through email and on LinkedIn. Thank you.